Everyone was smiling over turkey and pie until my sister turned to me and asked the question that made the entire room freeze, forcing me to choose between silence and destroying our family's comfortable lies. The golden glow of the dining room suddenly felt suffocating as every fork paused mid-air. Every conversation died, and all eyes landed on me like spotlights. I could feel 35 years of suppressed resentment bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest, threatening to spill out and shatter the perfect Norman Rockwell tableau my family had spent decades carefully constructing around our Thanksgiving table. My name is Rachel Monroe, and at 35, I've built what most people would consider a successful life. I'm the director of strategic marketing at Bright Pulse Innovations, a tech company in Portland that's been making waves in the sustainable energy sector. My corner office overlooks the Willamette River. My salary has more zeros than my parents ever dreamed of, and I've traveled to more countries than my hometown of Maple Creek. Oregon has traffic lights, but none of that seems to matter when I'm sitting around my family's dining table. Maple Creek is the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do, where the biggest excitement is the annual Harvest Festival, and where success is measured not by your bank account or professional achievements, but by how quickly you can check off life's supposed milestones: marriage, house, kids, rinse, repeat. It's a charming place if you're into that sort of thing: tree-lined streets, white picket fences, the whole American dream package wrapped up in a population of 8,000 people who all seem to have their lives figured out by age 25. My father, Robert Monroe, built his reputation in Maple Creek as the owner of Monroe Hardware, a family business that supplied tools and supplies to half the county for 30 years before he sold it to a regional chain. At 64, he's the kind of man who still wears flannel shirts tucked into jeans, who can fix anything with duct tape and determination, and who measures a person's worth by their ability to provide for a family. He's not a bad man, just one whose worldview was shaped in an era where a woman's ultimate achievement was landing a good husband and raising his children. My mother, Elaine, 60 years old and still beautiful in that gentle, faded way of women who've spent their lives caring for everyone except themselves, has turned volunteer work into an art form. She's on the hospital auxiliary board, organizes the church bake sales, and somehow manages to know every piece of gossip in town while maintaining her reputation as the sweetest woman in Maple Creek. She means well, they all do, but her idea of success for her daughters never extended beyond white wedding dresses and nursery decorations. Then there's Melissa, my 32-year-old sister, who has somehow managed to become the living embodiment of everything our parents dreamed their daughters would be. She married Ethan 3 years ago, a steady, reliable software engineer who wears polo shirts and plays golf on weekends. He's exactly the kind of man who looks good on Christmas cards and makes small talk about home improvement projects at family gatherings. Together, they just bought a house in Willow Heights, the newest development in Maple Creek, where every lawn is perfectly manicured and every mailbox matches the shutters. Melissa has always been the golden child, though I don't think she ever intended it that way. She just happened to want all the things our parents hoped she would want. She was homecoming queen, dated the quarterback, studied elementary education in college, and met her future husband at a church social. Her life has unfolded like a greeting card commercial, complete with engagement photos in pumpkin patches and a wedding reception in the community center where our parents had their own reception 34 years ago. The house in Willow Heights is Melissa's latest triumph, a 4-bedroom colonial with granite countertops, a 2-car garage, and enough space for the children she and Ethan plan to start trying for sometime soon. She's been texting me photos for weeks: the gleaming hardwood floors, the master bedroom with its walk-in closet, the spare room that's just waiting to be converted into a nursery. Each image comes with a caption like, "You should really think about getting a place out here," or "Wouldn't this be perfect for you and your future family?" The irony isn't lost on me that my family has spent years treating my achievements like consolation prizes. When I got promoted to director level, my mother's first response was, "That's wonderful, honey, but don't let work become more important than finding someone special." When I bought my condo in Portland's Pearl District, a gorgeous space with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, my father asked if I was sure I could afford the mortgage, on just one income. Every accomplishment gets filtered through the lens of what I'm supposedly missing, as if my life is just a holding pattern until I find a man to make it complete. For years, I've bitten my tongue through countless family gatherings where the conversation inevitably turns to my relationship status. I've perfected the art of deflecting questions about dating with updates about work projects or travel plans. I've learned to smile and nod when well-meaning relatives suggest I try online dating or ask why I'm being so picky. I've endured decades of gentle but persistent pressure disguised as concern for my happiness. But something about this year feels different. Maybe it's Melissa's new house, or the way my mother's phone calls have become increasingly frequent and pointed, or the fact that I'm staring down my mid-30s while still being treated like a wayward teenager who hasn't figured out her life yet. Whatever it is, I can feel something building inside me, a pressure that's been accumulating for years and is finally approaching its breaking point. As I drive the familiar route from Portland to Maple Creek this Thanksgiving morning, watching the city give way to farmland and small towns, I can't shake the feeling that this year's family gathering is going to be different. I just don't know yet whether that difference will be evolution or explosion. The pressure started building 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, like a storm system you can see approaching on the weather radar but can't do anything to stop. It began, as it always does, with my mother's phone calls. "Rachel, honey, I was just thinking about you," she said during what I now realize was the first salvo in her pre-holiday campaign. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with her familiar ringtone. Melissa showed me the most beautiful photos of their new place. "Have you seen the kitchen? It's absolutely gorgeous. You really should drive out there this weekend." I should have recognized the setup. Mom doesn't make casual calls about kitchen renovations, but I was distracted, half focused on spreadsheets, so I made the mistake of engaging. "I'm sure it's lovely. Mom, I'll see it at Thanksgiving." "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Thanksgiving. It's going to be so nice having everyone together, especially now that Melissa and Ethan have that beautiful home to fill. You know, she mentioned they're thinking about starting a family soon. Isn't that exciting?" There it was, the opening move. Not subtle, but then again, my mother has never been one for subtlety when it comes to what she considers my life's glaring deficiencies. "That's great for them," I said, keeping my voice neutral while highlighting a particularly concerning dip in third-quarter projections. "It really is. And 32 is such a perfect age to start having children. Not too young, not too—" She let the sentence hang there like a loaded gun, and I could practically hear her calculating my age in her head, doing the math that led to all her unspoken concerns about biological clocks and fertility windows. The calls became more frequent after that. Every few days, my phone would light up with another casual conversation that somehow always circled back to Melissa's domestic bliss and my apparent lack thereof. Mom developed a talent for working marriage and motherhood into discussions about everything from grocery shopping to the weather. I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the store today. She told me during one particularly transparent call, "You remember her daughter Kelly. She just had her second baby. Such a beautiful family they have. Kelly always asks about you, you know. She says she can't believe someone as smart and pretty as you is still single." I started letting more of her calls go to voicemail. But Melissa was another story entirely, where Mom's pressure came wrapped in maternal concern and thinly veiled hints. My sister's approach was more direct death by 1,000 cheerful text messages. Photos of her new house arrived daily, each one accompanied by commentary that felt increasingly pointed. "Look at this gorgeous master suite," she texted along with a picture of a bedroom roughly the size of my entire living room. "Ethan surprised me with new bedding. Can't wait for you to see it in person." Then came the kitchen shots. "Finally have room to host proper family dinners. You should really think about getting a place with more space for entertaining." The spare bedroom photos were the worst. Our future nursery, well, office for now, but we're hoping to change that soon. Maybe you could get something like this nearby so our kids could grow up together." Each message felt like a tiny paper cut, individually harmless, but collectively forming a pattern of wounds that stung more than they should have. The assumption that I wanted what she wanted, the suggestion that my life was somehow incomplete without her version of happiness, the casual dismissal of everything I'd built for myself in favor of a future I'd never expressed interest in pursuing. I tried responding with enthusiasm at first, hearting her photos and sending back encouraging messages about her decorating choices. But as the days passed and the messages kept coming, I found myself growing increasingly irritated. When she sent a photo of their dining room with the caption, "Perfect for hosting holiday dinners. When you finally settle down, you'll need a space like this," I didn't respond at all. The breaking point came the weekend before Thanksgiving, when Melissa called me directly, something she rarely did anymore, preferring the safety of text messages where tone couldn't be misinterpreted. "Hey, I know you're probably busy with work stuff," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of cheerful condescension that had always made my teeth clench. "But I wanted to personally invite you to see the house before Thursday. Ethan's going to be out of town for a client meeting, so it would be just us girls. We could have wine and I could show you everything properly." "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I've got a lot to wrap up before the holiday." "You always have work to wrap up," she said, and there was something sharper in her voice now. "Rachel, I worry about you sometimes. You work so hard. But what are you working toward, I mean? Don't you want something more? Someone to share all this success with?" There it was, the question that had been lurking beneath every family conversation for the past 5 years, the implication that my achievements were somehow hollow because I experienced them alone, the suggestion that professional success was just a placeholder for the real business of being a woman. "I'm happy with my life, Melissa," I said, but even to my own ears, the words sounded defensive. "I know you think you are," she replied. "But happiness isn't just about career advancement. There's so much joy in building something with someone else, in creating a real home, in planning for a family. I just want that for you." After I hung up, I sat in my condo looking out at the Portland skyline, feeling the weight of their concern pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. The worst part wasn't even their questions about my life choices. It was the way they made me doubt myself. In quiet moments like this, I found myself wondering if they were right, if my beautiful condo was really just an expensive way to be alone, if my career success was just compensation for some fundamental failure to achieve what really mattered. But then I'd remember the satisfaction of closing a major deal, the thrill of seeing a campaign I'd developed succeed beyond expectations, the freedom to travel when I wanted and make decisions based solely on what I wanted. I'd remember that I genuinely loved my life, most of the time. It was only when filtered through my family's expectations that it started to feel insufficient. By the time Thanksgiving week arrived, I was wound tighter than I'd ever been before a family gathering. Every previous holiday had been challenging, but this year felt different. This year, they had Melissa's perfect house as proof of concept for their vision of success. This year, their gentle pressure had evolved into something that felt more like an intervention. As I packed my overnight bag Wednesday night, I caught myself in the mirror and barely recognized the tense, defensive expression on my face. This wasn't how I wanted to feel about seeing my family, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was walking into an ambush, that this Thanksgiving dinner was going to be less about gratitude and more about a final push to get me to admit that my life was lacking. I had no idea how right I was or how spectacularly wrong it was going to go for all of us. The Monroe family home at 215 Maple Street looked exactly like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Golden light spilled from every window, and I could smell the turkey from the driveway, that rich, savory aroma mixed with cinnamon and nutmeg that meant Mom had been cooking since 5:30 in the morning. The front porch was decorated with corn stalks and pumpkins, and someone had hung a wreath made of autumn leaves on the red front door. It was picture perfect, the kind of scene that should have filled me with warmth and nostalgia. Instead, I felt like I was walking into a carefully constructed stage set where I'd been assigned the role of the family disappointment. Rachel. Mom appeared in the doorway before I'd even made it up the front steps, wiping her hands on the turkey-printed apron she'd worn every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. She pulled me into one of her signature hugs, the kind that lasted just a beat too long and came with a whispered, "I'm so glad you're here, sweetheart," that carried undertones of relief, as if she'd been genuinely worried I might not show up. The house was warm and filled with the controlled chaos of holiday preparation. Dad was in his usual spot in the living room, watching football with the volume turned up just loud enough to be heard over the kitchen activity. He looked up from the game long enough to give me a quick hug and ask about traffic from Portland, but his attention was clearly divided between me and whatever play was developing on screen. "Where's Melissa?" I asked, though I could already hear her voice coming from the kitchen, animated and bright in that way that meant she was in full hostess mode. "Oh, she's been here since 10 this morning," Mom said, leading me toward the kitchen. "She wanted to help with everything. She's become such a wonderful cook since she got that new kitchen. You should see what she brought: homemade cranberry sauce and the most beautiful green bean casserole. She even made her own fried onions from scratch." Of course she did! I'd stopped at the grocery store that morning and picked up a bottle of wine and a pumpkin pie from the bakery section, which suddenly felt pathetically inadequate. Rachel. Melissa appeared in the kitchen doorway, radiant in a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked like she'd stepped out of a catalog for elegant holiday entertaining, with her hair in perfect loose waves and just enough makeup to look effortlessly beautiful. "I'm so excited for you to hear about the house. I have so much to tell you." The kitchen was Mom's domain, a space that hadn't changed much since I was a child, except for the addition of a few modern appliances that Dad had bought her over the years. The counters were covered with serving dishes in various stages of preparation, and the air was thick with steam and the competing aromas of a dozen different dishes. It felt smaller than I remembered, more cramped, especially with 3 women trying to navigate around each other. "Let me show you pictures," Melissa said, already pulling out her phone before I'd even set down my purse. "I know I've been texting you photos, but you really can't get the full scope from phone pictures." For the next 20 minutes, I was subjected to a comprehensive virtual tour of every room, closet, and cabinet in Melissa and Ethan's new home, the granite countertops that were absolutely perfect for entertaining, the master bathroom with its soaking tub that was like having a spa in your own home, the walk-in closet that was bigger than most people's bedrooms. The spare room that she mentioned, with a meaningful look, was just waiting for the right purpose. "And the neighborhood is incredible," she continued, swiping through photos of tree-lined streets and perfectly manicured lawns. "Everyone's so friendly, and there are already 3 families with young children on our block. It's going to be perfect when we start our family." Mom practically glowed with each detail, adding her own commentary about how smart and responsible it was for young couples to invest in real estate, how important it was to put down roots and become part of a community. Dad wandered in periodically to grab another beer and contribute his own observations about property values and the importance of building equity instead of throwing money away on rent. I nodded and smiled and made appropriate appreciative sounds while internally calculating that their mortgage payment was probably less than what I paid monthly for my downtown condo. Not that anyone asked about my living situation, or seemed particularly interested in the fact that I owned property too, just in a different zip code with a different set of priorities. "You really should think about getting something out there," Melissa said as we finally moved into the dining room to set the table. "There are still a few lots available in the development, and the builder is offering great incentives for buyers. Plus, it would be so fun to be neighbors. We could have sister dinners every week." The dining room table was set with Mom's good china, the pattern with tiny blue flowers that had been her wedding china and would presumably be passed down to whichever daughter produced grandchildren first. The centerpiece was a cornucopia that Mom had been using since I was in elementary school, surrounded by small pumpkins and gourds that she'd probably picked up at the same farm stand where she'd been shopping for 30 years. "Rachel, you sit here," Mom directed, pointing to my usual spot directly across from Melissa. "And when Ethan gets here, he'll sit next to Melissa, of course." Ethan arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of confident smile that came with being the family favorite. He'd gained a little weight since the wedding, settling into married life with the contentment of a man who'd successfully checked all the boxes society expected him to check. He was perfectly pleasant asking about my work, complimenting the house decorations, helping carry dishes from the kitchen, but there was something in his manner that suggested he saw me as a cautionary tale rather than an equal. As we finally gathered around the table, the conversation flowed easily through safe topics: the weather, football scores, local news from Maple Creek. But I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation, the sense that everyone was building up to something. Melissa kept glancing at me with barely contained excitement, like she was sitting on a secret she was dying to share. It wasn't until we were halfway through the main course, with everyone's wine glasses refilled and the comfortable warmth of a family meal settling over the table, that Melissa made her move. "So," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of casual curiosity that I'd learned to dread over the years. "I've been dying to ask you something. Rachel." Every fork around the table paused. The comfortable dinner conversation died as if someone had turned off a radio. Even Dad looked up from his plate, suddenly paying attention in a way that made my stomach clench with dread. "What's that?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. I could feel it in the air like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. Melissa set down her wine glass and leaned forward slightly, her expression perfectly innocent except for the calculated gleam in her eyes. "I just bought this gorgeous home, and I'm so excited about starting the next chapter of my life with Ethan. It got me thinking about you and wondering." She paused, letting the moment stretch just long enough to ensure she had everyone's complete attention. "When will you settle down?" The question hit the table like a physical blow. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of a football crowd cheering on the television Dad had forgotten to turn off, 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me with expressions ranging from curious to concerned to smugly expectant. I felt something crack inside my chest, not break. Exactly. But develop a fissure that I knew was about to split wide open. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The ambush I'd sensed coming. The final, public challenge to defend a life that apparently needed defending. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down on me like a physical thing, and I realized that this Thanksgiving dinner had never been about gratitude or family togetherness. It had been about this moment, about cornering me into admitting that my life was lacking, that their way was the right way, that I was finally ready to surrender my stubborn independence and join the ranks of properly settled women. The worst part was the satisfaction I could see flickering in Melissa's eyes, the sense that she'd finally asked the question everyone had been thinking but had been too polite to voice directly. She'd done it with a smile, with the kind of loving concern that made it impossible to object without looking defensive or ungrateful. But as I sat there, feeling the familiar heat of embarrassment and frustration rising in my cheeks, I realized something had shifted. The old Rachel would have deflected with humor or changed the subject or found some way to smooth over the awkwardness without making waves. This Rachel was done smoothing. I took a slow sip of wine, buying myself a few seconds while my mind raced through the familiar catalog of deflections I'd perfected over the years. I could laugh it off, make a joke about being married to my career. I could turn the conversation back to Melissa's house, ask about their renovation timeline or their plans for landscaping. I could even excuse myself to help with dessert, letting the moment pass like so many others before it. Instead, I heard myself saying, "That's an interesting question. Melissa, what exactly do you mean by settle down?" The response seemed to catch her off guard. Her confident smile flickered for just a moment before reassembling itself. "You know what I mean. Find someone special. Get married. Start building a real life together. the kind of stability that comes with partnership. I said, nodding thoughtfully. So you're asking when I'm going to find a man to validate my existence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down too quickly. Dad cleared his throat in that way he did when conversations veered into territory he found uncomfortable. Ethan suddenly became very interested in his green bean casserole. "That's not what I meant at all," Melissa said, her voice taking on a defensive edge even as she tried to maintain her reasonable tone. "I just think you'd be so much happier if you had someone to share your success with, someone to come home to. Don't you want that?" "What I want," I said carefully, "is for my family to understand that my life doesn't need fixing." But even as the words left my mouth, I could see they weren't landing the way I intended. Instead of backing down, my family seemed to interpret my response as an opening for intervention. "Sweetheart," Mom jumped in, her voice gentle but firm. "No one's saying your life needs fixing. We just worry about you sometimes. Living alone in that little apartment." "Condo," I corrected. "It's a condo that I own in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods." "Of course, your condo," Mom continued, waving away the distinction like it was irrelevant. "But it's so temporary feeling, like you're still waiting for your real life to start. And you're 35 now. Honey, if you want children, you can't wait forever." There, it was the biological clock argument. The trump card they always played when they wanted to make me feel like I was running out of time for happiness, as if my ovaries came with an expiration date that invalidated every choice I'd made about how to spend my life. "Who says I want children?" I asked, and the question landed like a grenade on the dinner table. "Don't be ridiculous," Dad said, speaking up for the first time since Melissa's initial question. "Of course you want children. All women want children. It's natural." "Is it?" I turned to face him directly. "Because I'm pretty sure wanting children isn't actually encoded in my DNA. I'm pretty sure it's a choice, and one that not every woman makes." "But you'd be such a wonderful mother," Melissa said, and her tone had shifted from challenging to pleading. "You're so smart and successful. Think about what you could teach a child, what kind of example you could set." "I am setting an example," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm showing that a woman can build a career she loves, own her own home, travel the world, and be completely fulfilled without needing a man or children to complete her." But don't you get lonely?" Mom asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice that made my chest tighten. "Don't you want someone to take care of you when you're sick, or to celebrate with when good things happen?" The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit, because yes, sometimes I did get lonely. Sometimes I came home from a particularly good day at work and wished I had someone to share it with. Sometimes I got the flu and had to take care of myself while fighting a fever. Sometimes I looked at couples walking hand in hand and felt a pang of something that might have been envy. But those moments didn't define my life or negate everything I'd built for myself. "I have friends," I said. "I have colleagues. I have a full life with people I care about who care about me. Why does it only count if one of those people is a husband?" "Because friends aren't the same as family," Ethan said, speaking up for the first time. "When you build something with someone, when you make that commitment, it's different. It's deeper, more meaningful." I stared at him. This man who'd known me for exactly 3 years and felt qualified to lecture me about the depth of my relationships. More meaningful than what? Exactly. More meaningful than the mentoring program I run for young women in tech. More meaningful than the marketing campaigns I've developed that have helped sustainable energy companies expand their reach. More meaningful than the scholarship fund I contribute to every year. "That's not what he meant," Melissa said quickly, shooting her husband a warning look. "We know you do important work. We're proud of you. But work isn't everything, Rachel. There's so much more to life than professional achievement." "Huh? Like what?" Like spending my weekends at Home Depot picking out paint samples, like having dinner parties where we discuss property taxes and school districts, like organizing my entire existence around someone else's needs and preferences. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and I could see the hurt flash across Melissa's face. But I was beyond caring about hurt feelings. Years of accumulated frustration were bubbling to the surface, and I couldn't seem to stop them. "That's a terrible thing to say," Mom said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Your sister has built a beautiful life with Ethan. They're happy together. They support each other. What's wrong with wanting that for you?" "What's wrong?" I said, setting down my wine glass with more force than necessary, "is the assumption that because it makes Melissa happy, it must be what I want too. What's wrong is treating my choices like they're mistakes that need correcting. What's wrong is sitting around this table talking about my life like it's a problem to solve instead of a life to celebrate." "We are celebrating your life," Dad said, but his tone suggested he thought I was being unreasonable. "We celebrate your promotions, your achievements, but success at work isn't the same as success in life. Honey, a career can't hold your hand or comfort you when things get tough." "No," I agreed, "but it can give me purpose and fulfillment and the financial independence to make choices based on what I want, not what I need. It can give me the satisfaction of knowing I've built something meaningful with my own hands and my own mind." But what happens when you retire?" Melissa asked. "What happens when your career is over and you're alone? What legacy will you have then?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized we'd reached the crux of their argument. In their minds, my refusal to get married and have children wasn't just selfish, it was ultimately pointless. What was the use of building a career if there was no one to inherit it, no family to carry on your memory? It was the most fundamental disagreement we'd ever had, and I was finally beginning to understand that no amount of explanation or justification was going to bridge the gap between their worldview and mine. They genuinely believed they were trying to save me from a lonely, meaningless existence, and I genuinely believed they were trying to squeeze me into a life that would slowly suffocate everything I valued about myself. The worst part was realizing that this conversation had been inevitable. All those years of biting my tongue, of deflecting and avoiding and keeping the peace, had only delayed this moment. Eventually, we were always going to end up here at this impasse where their love felt like judgment and my independence felt like rejection. I looked around the table at these people I loved, seeing the frustration and confusion in their faces, and felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Something snapped. I could actually feel it happen like a rubber band that had been stretched too far finally giving way. 35 years of swallowing my words, of smoothing over conflicts, of being the reasonable one who didn't make waves, all came undone in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Shh, you want to know about legacy?" I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. "Let me tell you about legacy." I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. 4 faces looked up at me with expressions ranging from shock to alarm, but I was beyond caring about their comfort. For the past 15 years, I've built a career that I'm proud of. I've helped companies develop sustainable energy solutions that are actually making a difference in the world. I've mentored dozens of young women who were told they didn't belong in tech, and I've watched them succeed beyond their wildest dreams. I've contributed more money to charitable causes in the last 5 years than this entire family has probably donated in a lifetime. My voice was rising, but I couldn't seem to control it. The words were pouring out of me like water through a broken dam. I own my home outright not because I found a man to split the mortgage with, but because I earned every dollar of the down payment myself. I've traveled to 23 countries, not as someone's wife or girlfriend, but as an independent woman who wanted to see the world on her own terms. I speak 3 languages, I have friends on 4 continents, and I've built a life that I actually enjoy living every single day. Rachel. Mom started, but I cut her off with a gesture that was sharp enough to make her flinch. "No, You've had your say for 35 years. Now it's my turn." I turned to face Melissa directly, and the hurt in her eyes almost made me stop. Almost. "You want to know what's wrong with your perfect little question about when I'll settle down? It assumes that everything I've accomplished, everything I've built, everything I am isn't enough. It assumes that my life is just a rough draft waiting for a man to come along and turn it into the final version." "That's not what I meant," Melissa whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears, because that's exactly what it sounded like. It sounded like you pitying me for being successful on my own instead of being successful as half of a couple. It sounded like you looking at my life and seeing something broken that needs fixing. I turned to face my parents, feeling 35 years of accumulated resentment crystallizing into words I'd never had the courage to speak before. "And you too, God. Where do I even start? You raised me to be independent, to work hard, to achieve things. You celebrated every good grade, every scholarship, every promotion. But apparently, all of that was just supposed to be a consolation prize until I found my real purpose as someone's wife and someone's mother." "We're proud of your achievements," Dad said, his voice defensive, "but we also want you to be happy." I am happy. The words exploded out of me with enough force to make everyone at the table jump. "That's what you don't understand. I'm not sitting in my condo every night crying into a pint of ice cream because I don't have a husband. I'm not watching romantic comedies and wondering what's wrong with me. I'm living exactly the life I want to live, and the only thing that makes me unhappy is sitting around this table listening to all of you talk about it like it's a tragedy." I could see tears forming in Mom's eyes, and part of me wanted to stop, to backpedal, to find some way to soften what I was saying. But I was too far gone, too angry, too tired of being the one who always backed down to keep the peace. "Shh, you know what the really twisted part is," I continued, my voice dropping to a more controlled level that somehow felt more dangerous than the shouting. "If I were a man, if I were your son instead of your daughter, you'd be proud of me. You'd brag to your friends about my success, my independence, my achievements. But because I'm a woman, because I'm supposed to want different things, everything I've accomplished gets filtered through this lens of what I'm supposedly missing." "That's not true," Mom protested, but her voice wavered. "Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked me about my work without immediately following it up with a question about my dating life? When was the last time you showed interest in the things I'm passionate about without suggesting that they'd be more meaningful if I had a family to share them with?" I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "You talk about legacy, about what happens when I'm old and alone. But what if I told you that I've already built my legacy? What if I told you that the women I've mentored, the projects I've contributed to, the difference I've made in my industry, what if that's enough for me? What if I don't need to reproduce myself biologically to feel like my life has meaning?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking, the soft hiss of the heating system kicking on. But from the 4 people at the table, nothing. "I've spent years trying to make you understand that my choices aren't a rejection of your values," I said, my voice quieter now but still carrying the weight of everything I'd been holding back. "But maybe they are. Maybe I am rejecting the idea that a woman's worth is measured by her ability to attract and keep a man. Maybe I am rejecting the notion that motherhood is the highest calling for every woman. Maybe I am choosing to define success on my own terms instead of accepting the definition you've handed down to me." I picked up my wine glass and drained it in one long swallow, feeling the alcohol burn slightly as it went down. When I set the glass back on the table, it made a soft clink that seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. "So, here's your answer. Melissa," I said, looking directly at my sister. "I will settle down when settling down means something other than giving up everything that makes me who I am. I will settle down when it means adding to my life instead of subtracting from it. I will settle down when I find someone who celebrates my independence instead of trying to cure it." I paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final blow. And if that never happens, if I spend the rest of my life exactly as I'm living it now, then I will consider myself incredibly fortunate to have avoided the kind of life where my greatest achievement is convincing someone else to share their mortgage with me. The hurt that flashed across Melissa's face was so sharp it was almost physical. Ethan's jaw tightened, and his hand moved protectively to cover his wife's. Mom made a small sound that might have been a sob, and Dad's face had gone red with what I recognized as the beginning of real anger. But I was past the point of caring about their reactions. Years of suppressed frustration had finally found their voice, and now that the words were out, I felt something that might have been relief mixed with the devastating knowledge that there was no taking any of it back. I had just blown up my family's comfortable fiction that we all wanted the same things, that love meant wanting someone to conform to your vision of their happiness. I had finally said out loud what I'd been thinking for years, that their concern for my well-being felt a lot like judgment, and their love felt a lot like control. And as I stood there, looking at their shocked, hurt faces, I realized that this was just the beginning. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I could feel their stares like physical weight pressing against my skin, but I couldn't bring myself to sit back down, couldn't pretend that everything was fine, couldn't slip back into the role of the accommodating daughter who always smoothed things over. "I need some air," I said finally, my voice hoarse from the emotional outburst. I walked out of the dining room without waiting for a response, grabbed my coat from the front closet, and stepped into the crisp November evening. The cold hit my flushed face like a slap, and I realized I was shaking not from the temperature, but from the adrenaline crash that always followed confrontation. My hands fumbled with my car keys as I walked toward my Honda, parked behind Dad's pickup truck in the narrow driveway. I needed to get away from the house, away from their wounded expressions and the wreckage of what had once been a family dinner. I needed space to think, to process what had just happened, to figure out how to move forward from here. I drove without conscious direction, muscle memory guiding me through the familiar streets of Maple Creek, until I found myself pulling into the gravel parking area beside Miller's Pond. It was the same spot where I'd come as a teenager when I needed to escape family drama or think through problems that seemed too big for my childhood bedroom. The pond was still and dark under the overcast sky, reflecting the bare branches of the oak trees that lined its banks. I sat on the same weathered picnic table where I'd spent countless hours during high school, my feet on the bench, my arms wrapped around my knees for warmth. The November air carried the scent of decomposing leaves and the faint smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. It was peaceful here, quiet except for the occasional splash of a fish jumping or the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. For the first time in hours, I could breathe without feeling like my chest was wrapped in steel bands. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen for a long moment before scrolling through my contacts to find Clara's number. Clara Martinez was my closest friend at Bright Pulse, the kind of person who could make me laugh even during the most stressful product launches. More importantly, she was someone who understood my life choices because she'd made similar ones herself. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Rachel, everything okay? You sound weird." I let out a laugh that was half sob, half hysteria. "Define okay. I just detonated my family's Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm currently sitting by a pond in the middle of nowhere questioning every life choice I've ever made." "Oh shit, what happened?" So I told her. All of it. The weeks of pressure building up to today. Melissa's pointed question about settling down. The way the conversation had spiraled into a full-scale interrogation of my life choices. And finally, my spectacular meltdown at the dinner table. Wait. Clara interrupted when I got to the part about legacy. "You said what to your sister about mortgage sharing?" I may have implied that her greatest achievement was convincing someone to split housing costs with her. "Jesus, Rachel, that's actually kind of brutal." "I know." I rested my forehead against my knees. "I know it was harsh, but Clara, you should have seen the way they were looking at me, like I was some kind of cautionary tale, like my entire life was just a series of mistakes that led to the tragedy of being 35 and single. "Okay, but here's the thing," Clara said, and I could hear her moving around what sounded like her kitchen. "You're not wrong about any of it. Your family has been pulling this passive-aggressive bullshit for years, and you finally called them on it. That doesn't make you the villain." "Doesn't it? They love me. They want me to be happy. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong for not wanting what normal people want." "Stop!" Clara's voice was sharp enough to cut through my self-doubt. "Do not let them gaslight you into thinking there's something wrong with you for building an amazing life on your own terms. Do not let them make you feel guilty for refusing to shrink yourself down to fit their idea of what a woman should want." I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of wind moving through the bare branches above me. Clara was right, of course. The problem wasn't that I'd finally spoken my truth. The problem was that my truth was incompatible with their vision of my happiness. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "I can't just pretend this didn't happen. I can't go back in there and apologize for wanting different things than they want for me." "You don't apologize," Clara said firmly. "You double down. You show them exactly what your version of success looks like." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you stop trying to defend your choices and start demonstrating their value. You know what your problem has been all these years? You've been playing defense. Every time they questioned your life, you explained and justified and tried to make them understand. But understanding isn't the same as respecting." I sat up straighter, feeling something shift in my chest. "Keep talking." "You want them to see that your life has meaning. Show them. You want them to understand that you've built something worth celebrating. Prove it. Stop asking for their approval and start demanding their respect." "How?" "You know how. You've got something in the works, don't you? That project you've been keeping close to your chest for the past few months." My breath caught. Clara was one of the few people who knew about the building in downtown Portland, the one I'd been quietly purchasing and renovating for the past 6 months. It was supposed to be a surprise, a personal project that I'd been funding with my savings and bonuses, a space that would house a startup incubator specifically designed for women entrepreneurs, with childcare services and flexible workspace options and all the support systems that traditional business incubators never seemed to consider. I'd been planning to announce it publicly once the renovations were complete, maybe at the new year. It was going to be my legacy project, the thing I was most proud of outside of my corporate achievements, the thing that proved I understood exactly what kind of impact I wanted to have on the world. "Clara, that's not ready yet. The renovations won't be finished until January, and I haven't even hired the full staff yet." "So, you've got the plans." "Right. The financial projections, the architectural renderings. You've got proof that this isn't just some pipe dream, it's a real thing that's really happening." I felt a slow smile spreading across my face as I understood what she was suggesting. "You think I should go back in there and tell them about the incubator?" "I think you should go back in there and show them what settling down looks like when you do it on your own terms. I think you should make them understand that you haven't been wasting your time being single. You've been building something that's going to outlast all of their mortgages and family photos." For the first time since I'd stormed out of the house, I felt something other than anger or hurt. I felt purpose. I felt the calm that came with having a plan, with knowing exactly what needed to happen next. "They're going to think I'm making it up," I said. "They're going to think I'm just trying to justify my choices with some fantasy project." "Then show them the receipts. Show them the building permits, the contractor invoices, the bank statements. Show them that this isn't a dream, it's an investment. It's a business. It's your version of building a family." I stood up from the picnic table, suddenly energized by the clarity of what I needed to do. I'd spent years trying to explain why their vision of happiness wasn't mine, but explanation wasn't enough anymore. It was time for demonstration. "Clara, you're a genius." "I know. Now go back in there and blow their minds." "And Rachel, when you do this, when you show them what you've really been building all this time, don't you dare apologize for any of it. You've earned the right to be proud." As I walked back to my car, I could feel something settling into place inside my chest, not anger anymore, but determination. They wanted to know when I was going to settle down. They were about to find out exactly what that looked like when Rachel Monroe did it her way. I walked back into the house at 7:45, my phone clutched in my hand and my heart hammering against my ribs. The dining room was exactly as I'd left it, my chair still pushed back from the table, my wine glass empty, the remnants of our interrupted dinner growing cold on the good china. They were all still there, speaking in hushed voices that stopped abruptly when they heard the front door close. I could feel the weight of their collective anxiety as I hung up my coat and walked back toward the dining room with purpose. "Rachel," Mom started, her voice tentative and thick with unshed tears. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about—" "Actually," I interrupted, stepping into the doorway with my phone held up, "I need to show you something first, all of you, and I need you to listen without interrupting until I'm finished." The authority in my voice seemed to catch them off guard. Dad straightened in his chair. Melissa and Ethan exchanged a quick glance, and Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin before giving me her full attention. "You want to know when I'm going to settle down," I said, moving to stand at the head of the table where I could see all of them clearly. "You want to know when I'm going to stop living this temporary life and start building something permanent, something meaningful, something that matters." I swiped to the photo gallery on my phone and found the folder I'd been secretly adding to for months. My hands were steady now, my voice clear and confident in a way it hadn't been during my earlier outburst. "This is the Meridian Building," I said, holding up my phone to show them the first image, a gorgeous historical brick building in downtown Portland. 4 stories of turn-of-the-century architecture with large windows and ornate stonework. Built in 1912, originally housed a department store, it's been empty for the past 3 years. I swiped to the next photo, watching their faces as they tried to understand where this was going. "I bought it 6 months ago." The words hit the table like a physical blow. Melissa's mouth fell open. Dad's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline, and Mom made a small gasping sound. "You... what?" Melissa whispered. "I bought it," I repeated, swiping to show them the architectural plans I'd commissioned. $800,000, cash, no mortgage, no cosigner, no husband required. I've spent the past 6 months overseeing renovations to convert it into something this community actually needs. I turned the phone toward them again, showing them the detailed floor plans that had cost me $15,000 to commission. The first floor will house a startup incubator specifically designed for women entrepreneurs, not just tech companies, all kinds of businesses. Everything from sustainable fashion to food trucks to consulting services. Ethan leaned forward despite himself, his software engineer brain clearly engaged by the technical aspects of what I was showing them. Those are professional architectural renderings. They should be... I hired the same firm that designed the renovation of the Pearl District condos. I swiped through more images, detailed construction photos, permit applications, contractor invoices. The second floor will have co-working spaces with sliding scale pricing based on income. The third floor will house childcare services so that single mothers and women with families can actually participate in entrepreneurship without having to choose between their businesses and their children. Mom's hand had gone to her throat, and she was staring at the phone screen like she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. "The fourth floor," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each detail, "will be dedicated to educational programming, financial literacy workshops, marketing seminars, legal clinics for small business owners, everything taught by volunteers from the professional community." I set the phone down on the table and looked at each of them in turn. This isn't a hobby project or some pipe dream I'm talking about to make myself feel better. This is a real business that will employ 12 people full-time and serve hundreds of women in the Portland area. The construction will be complete in January, and we're opening in March. Dad found his voice first. How did you finance something like this?" "The same way you financed your hardware store, Dad, with careful planning, smart investments, and years of building credit and savings. The difference is that I didn't need to convince a bank that my husband would co-sign the loan if I defaulted." I picked up my phone again and scrolled to a spreadsheet that showed 5 years of financial projections. I've already secured commitments from 15 businesses that want to use the co-working space. 3 local nonprofits have agreed to partner with us on programming. Portland State University is going to provide graduate student interns for the business mentoring program. Melissa was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. But how did you have time to plan all this while working full-time? The same way you had time to plan your wedding while working full-time, I said. When something matters to you, you find the time, you make the sacrifices, you do the work. I swiped to one more photo, an image of the building's exterior with a newly installed sign that read, "The Meridian Center for Women's Enterprise," in elegant bronze lettering. So to answer your question, Melissa, I said, my voice dropping to a quieter register that somehow carried more weight than all my earlier shouting. This is me settling down. This is me putting down roots and building something permanent and meaningful. This is me creating a legacy that will impact real people's lives for decades to come. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet after my outburst. This was the silence of people trying to recalibrate their entire understanding of someone they thought they knew. The total investment, including the building purchase, renovations, and first-year operating costs, is $1.2 million. I continued. I've been planning this for 3 years and actively working on it for 18 months. It will serve approximately 400 women in its first year of operation. I looked directly at Dad. You asked about legacy earlier, about what happens when my career is over and I'm alone. This building will serve Portland's women entrepreneurs long after I'm gone. The businesses that start here will create jobs, serve communities, and build generational wealth for families. That's my legacy. I turned to Mom. You worried about me being alone, about not having anyone to celebrate with when good things happen. I have 12 employees who are counting on this project to provide their livelihoods. I have dozens of future clients who have been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. I have a community of people who believe in what I'm building. Finally, I looked at Melissa, seeing my own reflection in her wide eyes. And you asked when I would settle down. This is what settling down looks like when you do it on your own terms, when you build something that matters to you instead of something that's expected of you. I straightened up, tucking my phone back into my pocket with hands that were no longer shaking. That's me settling down, Melissa, on my own terms, in my own way, for my own reasons. And I've never been more proud of anything in my life. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I watched 4 faces process information that fundamentally challenged everything they thought they knew about my life, my priorities, and my capabilities. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 o'clock, marking the passage of time in a moment that felt suspended outside of it. Dad was the first to move, reaching across the table to pick up my phone where I'd left it displaying the financial projections. He squinted at the screen, his weathered fingers surprisingly gentle as he scrolled through the numbers with the careful attention of a man who'd run his own business for 3 decades. These numbers, he said finally, his voice hoarse. This is a substantial investment. This isn't playing around. No, I said quietly. It's not. Mom had gone very still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the phone screen as Dad continued to scroll through the images. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You did all this by yourself. I had help, architects, contractors, lawyers, financial advisors. But yes, I conceived it, planned it, and funded it myself. Melissa hadn't said a word since I'd started my presentation. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at me like I was a stranger who had somehow taken the place of her sister. When she finally found her voice, it came out shaky and uncertain. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say anything about this before? The question hung in the air, loaded with hurt and confusion. I could have deflected it, could have given some easy answer about wanting to surprise them or waiting until the project was complete. but we were past the point of comfortable lies. "Because I knew you'd find a way to make it about what was missing," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "Because I knew that even proof that I'm building something meaningful and permanent would somehow get filtered through your concerns about me being alone, because I was tired of having to justify my choices to people who had already decided they knew what would make me happy." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of understanding that I could see spreading across their faces. Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "This is impressive, Rachel. Really impressive. The scope of it, the planning, the community impact. It's not what I expected when you said you were going to show us something." "What did you expect?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I don't know. Photos of a condo renovation? Maybe. Or a new job offer. Something smaller. Something more appropriate for a single woman to tackle on her own," I asked, and watched him wince. "I didn't mean it like that." "Didn't you?" I turned to look at all of them again. "Because that's exactly what this has always been about. The assumption that anything I accomplish on my own must be somehow lesser than what I could accomplish with a husband. The belief that my independence is a limitation rather than a strength." Dad set my phone down carefully, his expression thoughtful in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child, asking him difficult questions about how the world worked. "I think," he said slowly, "that we owe you an apology." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. Dad wasn't a man who apologized easily or often. When he admitted he was wrong, it meant something. We've been treating you like you were lost," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Like you needed our help finding your way. But you weren't lost at all, were you? You knew exactly where you were going." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes for the first time since this whole confrontation began. I tried to tell you, so many times. I tried to explain that I was happy, that I was building something important. "We weren't listening," Mom said, and her own voice was thick with tears. "We were so worried about you ending up alone that we couldn't see you were never alone at all. You were building community." Melissa was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Rachel, the question I asked about settling down, it was cruel. It was dismissive. I thought I was being encouraging, but I was really just being condescending." I finished for her, but my voice was gentler now. "Yeah, you were. I had no idea you were capable of something like this," she said, gesturing toward my phone. "That sounds terrible, but it's true. I thought I knew what your life was, and I was completely wrong." I walked around the table and sat back down in my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the past 2 hours. "The thing is, you could have known. If you'd ever asked me about my goals instead of my dating life, if you'd shown interest in my work instead of treating it like a consolation prize, if you'd trusted that I might actually know what I want." "You're right," Mom said simply. "We were wrong. About all of it." I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them. Maybe for the first time in years. They weren't villains who had deliberately set out to diminish my achievements. They were people who loved me but had been operating from such a fundamentally different worldview that they couldn't see my happiness for what it was. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Where do we go from here?" "Now," Dad said, picking up his wine glass and holding it toward me, "we toast the Meridian Center for Women's Enterprise, and we congratulate our daughter on building something extraordinary." One by one, they raised their glasses. Mom was still crying, but she was smiling too. Melissa lifted her wine with a shaky hand, her eyes bright with what looked like genuine admiration. Ethan nodded at me with newfound respect. "To Rachel," Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of misunderstanding finally being set right, "for showing us what settling down really looks like." We clinked glasses across the table, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly seen by the people who were supposed to know me best. The anger that had been burning in my chest for so long finally began to cool, replaced by something that felt like hope. I had spent so many years trying to make them understand me through explanation and justification. In the end, all it took was showing them what I'd been building while they weren't paying attention. The old Rachel would have spent the rest of the evening apologizing for her earlier outburst, smoothing over the conflict, pretending that nothing had fundamentally changed. But the new Rachel, the one who owned a building and employed 12 people and was about to change hundreds of women's lives, she just smiled and accepted their toast. Because sometimes the only way to prove your worth is to stop asking for permission to be worthy. And as I sat there surrounded by my family's newfound respect, I realized that this was what victory looked like when you fought on your own terms, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding, not the elimination of differences, but the acknowledgement of their validity. That was me, settling down at last. Thank you so much for listening to Rachel's story. I hope it resonated with anyone who's ever felt pressured to live someone else's version of success. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story? Are you at home, commuting, taking a break at work? Drop a comment below and let's connect. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this tale, and share your thoughts about Rachel's journey. Have you ever had to prove your choices to family or friends? I'd love to hear your own stories of settling down on your own terms.